So now we're going to be moving to, I guess, from some of the detail levers to more right at the beginning end of the decision making and the business case. And I'd like to introduce Adrian Dwyer, the CEO of Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. I will, decarbonising construction report, putting the carbon price into the business case. I'm very happy I'll put a link to the report if you like, Adrian, and I'll hand it over to you to speak. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Monica. So I'm from Infrastructure Partnerships Australia. I'm CEO of Infrastructure Partnerships Australia is a think tank and member network for the infrastructure sector. 40% of our members from public sector, 60% from the private sector. And I guess I'm going to tell everybody that's in this virtual room stuff that they already know, and probably know far more about it than I do. But bear with me because there's some punchlines at the end. I guess about 2 years ago, we embarked on a big piece of research called Decarbonising Infrastructure, and that essentially found the infrastructure sector's got three real challenges from a carbon perspective. One is energy, transport is the second, and then embedded embodied carbon is the third. And what that research found is, in essence, that the energy sector will decarbonise because the economics are so, and it can do it clumsily or it can do it neatly. Hopefully we're transitioning to a more neat version of that story at the moment. The transport sector will decarbonise because it will electrify for the most part, particularly for the light transport, but also things like using hydrogen for heavy freight is ultimately an electrification story because the power will be derived from renewable electricity and then converted into hydrogen. But really the prickly piece is the embedded embodied carbon. It was pretty clear from our research that the first two of those three challenges, there are pathways available. There's things we can do from a public and private sector perspective to accelerate those and make them smoother journeys, but actually there isn't a clear pathway available from the embodied carbon perspective. So having taken that and done some consultation on that piece of work, we went and spoke to our members, which include, as I said, the full life cycle of infrastructure. And one of the things that became immediately apparent from those discussions is, by the time you get to those that have the biggest levers to pull from a decarbonisation perspective on a project, the big decisions have already been taken and those levers are therefore locked. So to give practical examples, we went and spoke to contractors that said we could deliver a lower carbon solution to project A. But the really big decisions that would change the carbon profile of that particular project were made well before we even got to the bidding stage. There are things around the kind of fundamental strategic design of a project, material choices, the particular trajectory or geometry of a project. All of these really big decisions are made well before we get to them. And actually, by the time we get to them, the incentive on us is to deliver this thing for the lowest price and hopefully turn a bit of a profit on building. So you've got to get earlier in the process. And then we off the back of that, therefore, wrote a piece of work that I think Monica has put in the chat box called Decarbonising Construction, looking specifically at the embedded carbon issue. And the key recommendation in that is that you need to have a carbon base case in the business case for projects. So I spent a number of years as Deputy CEO of Infrastructure Australia, spent a lot of time looking over business cases, and we don't put carbon in them. So we maybe have some stuff around operational carbon and the preferred option. If it's public transport, we say, well, this would be great because it's going to take so many cars off the road, or this rail project is going to be great because it's going to take this many containers and trucks off the road. But actually, we don't consider the embedded carbon in any way in those projects. And in fact, when we look globally, there's only one place that does it routinely, and that's Sweden. There's lots of places that have done it for individual projects. But there's nowhere that does it routinely. So what it is that we called for is for the preferred option within a business case, and often in a business case you have 4 or 5 different options. For the preferred option, you should have, for the reference design, a carbon-based case. So you should know if a minister or a cabinet takes a decision to build a particular piece of infrastructure, they have awareness of the carbon that will be emitted through the construction of that project. We've also said in the best case example, you should also have a base case for a non-build option. You should also know the carbon implications of pricing a piece of infrastructure differently, for instance. So why have we recommended this as a solution? So it's at the strategic decision-making level. You can make decisions that in fact involve less materials. And ultimately it gives you the option, as a government, the option, but not the obligation to compete carbon through the process. So if you know that your base case for a project is X units of carbon, you can say to bidders, we'll be seeking that this project is procured, and your bids to build this project must have 30% less than the base case that we're producing, and use competition to drive innovation, drive the supply chain, and drive different designs so that you can get less carbon in the project. Pleased to say that the Hudson mentioned earlier on the New South Wales Infrastructure New South Wales discussion paper that's adopted this recommendation verbatim, and we're pretty confident that this will get up in New South Wales. Also pretty confident that it will get up in other jurisdictions as well, and when you get the big jurisdictions, hopefully the others will follow. Not claiming that it's a silver bullet. Appreciate there's a whole bunch of other challenges, but it's our view that you've got to have this in the very first conversation. It's got to be owned by the centre of a government. We think ideally owned by Treasury, so the agencies that ultimately deliver infrastructure, ultimately procure infrastructure, they don't get the money unless they conform to these requirements. And crucially, that you've got decision makers are aware of the carbon implications of their decisions, explicitly aware of the carbon implications of their decisions. And actually, we think the biggest benefits are in that decision-making stage where you can actually just have decisions that use less carbon, use less materials, and therefore have less carbon. I know that might be unpopular if you're someone that sells materials for construction, but actually the biggest benefits in this are changing the decisions early on so that you're not locked into particular carbon outcomes even before you begin the procurement. And I guess my final comment is this would all be a whole bunch easier if we had a carbon tax, but we don't. Hopefully one day we will, but in the absence of that, it's things like this that are a bit more practical that we should keep pushing.